Hello, it's Today in EVE Online, December 4th, 2019. I am Matterall here with Delacar. How you doing, Delacar?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Delacar is from Test Alliance, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, still am.
Awesome. Let's go over this. I think it's in the proposal. No, this is actually patch notes. Gosh, I'm not sure. I don't think this is under discussion. I think this is what's coming in about 10 days. Yeah, it says right here, not 10 days, but like 6 days. Coming on December 10th alongside the free market release are the latest set of improvements to core gameplay, this time focused on structures and time zone tanking, quote unquote. This update is called Kicking Over Castles. So it is an update. These are essentially patch notes, which means in a few days this will be in the game.
Yep,
Okay.
and it's definitely it's awesome. It's good to see that they want to continue to touch the core, which is what they said at Vegas, and here they are. I mean, this is a big topic that has been talked about for a long time.
Right. I think the last improvements we had to timers or adjustments, whether you consider them improvements or not, depends on who you are, was about a year and a half ago. So it's been that long since timers have been dealt with. So what are they going to do this time around?
Well, a quick summary. Um, Basically what they've outlined is they're changing the aspect of the last timer for structures that players can anchor, and they've made some adjustments to faction warfare structures in terms of pilots being able to tether inside of them. They've also made a bunch of smaller changes that will have an effect on what is referred to as alarm clocking, which is the act where your opponents who own the structure have put it in a time zone that you're not really normally awake in, and thus you need to set your alarm clock for to be able to go and kill it. That specific change that I'm referring to is definitely worth mentioning. Some might want to gloss over it, but essentially, when you go and you bash a structure, they set a time for it to come out to, but there can be a
Come out
regular
to
2 hour.
means become
Yeah,
vulnerable.
yeah, become vulnerable. Yeah, there's usually a +2 or -2 hour differentiation. So let's say I set it to like 7 p.m. on a Saturday. It could come out at 9 p.m. on a Saturday or 5 p.m. on a Saturday, anywhere in between there, right? So now it's going to be, instead of 2 hour differentiation, there's a 3 hour differentiation. So um, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's going to be super huge as a change, but that differentiation does affect sort of like the quiet background that sets these things up. You know, the FC team and whatnot have to anticipate being available for slightly longer, for example.
Mm-hmm. So a little more leeway. The thing is that what you can do now is time it for a time when your guys are available on the weekend. So one of the criticisms I've heard is that there is no way to take out a structure over one weekend. You would have to reinforce it during the week in order to prepare it to be completely destroyed on the weekend, because it takes 2.5 days from the armor timer, the second reinforcement, to the point where you can actually kill it. 2.5 days, the weekend is only 2 days. So if you were to do it on Friday, it wouldn't really be available to be destroyed until after the weekend. So in order to get it set up for yourself, you would have to produce a group large enough to alarm clock, if you will, to make it vulnerable on the weekend. You would have to produce those guys on a Wednesday night or Thursday morning in order to set yourself up for a Saturday showdown. And if you don't, if you bring your guys to do the armor timer on the weekend when they're mostly available, then the final timer will actually be on a Monday or a Tuesday, depending on when you reinforce it. That is by design, according to, I think, what Sword Dragon said in Discord, Talking Station's Discord, was that he wasn't comfortable with somebody coming back from a weekend away and finding out that their stuff was gone. So that's so he's a proponent of 2.5 days. So you don't want to be able to kill something over the weekend. But other CSM members hint strongly that they wanted it to be over a weekend because they understand that that's when you collect people. That's when you collect the most people to play the game, on weekends, and it's hard to
I
entice them on a weekday to show up. Go ahead. What do you think, Delica?
Yeah, I can understand where Sort's coming from. It's very for me, it's a logical path. Why would you want to make a game where you could go away for a weekend and come back to nothing? But I think it's important to note that we would want to have some data regarding uh, whether that would be the case, because you have to understand these huge empires, right? If one person goes away for a weekend, which already happens plenty of the time, not everyone's always on every weekend. Everything doesn't just fall apart because some people take on that extra responsibility to keep watch over everything. People have developed tools to help them understand where their structures are being attacked, like when the drifters did their thing this last summer. Certain groups were better equipped because they had tools that would tell them exactly which structures and where and at what percentage they were being hit at. And so that's sort of like I understand where he's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who, maybe I'm in high sec or something like that, and I only own one structure, or maybe I'm in NPC null and I anchored a Retaru somewhere. With the change, where it's even potentially where it could disappear over a weekend, I could, come back realistically speaking and find all of my stuff asset safety, which is another like aspect of why I kind of disagree with him just a little bit, because not everything can truly disappear right now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I understand that what he wants to protect is something that is important, which is when you build up wealth or when you strive towards a goal, that goal doesn't just immediately get crushed in the system, which I mean, I think over time, CCP have been chatting with the players and are doing a good job at finding that medium and that balance. And they're probably definitely, I would say, listening to those kinds of voices and making sure that they temper their responses and changes to that particular opinion.
Yeah. Well, we shall see. I think it's a wait and see from the people who are saying 2.5 days is good. We'll see what the statistics are. If this isn't far enough, then it'll go down to a day and a half, and then you could reinforce something on a Friday and kill it on a Sunday, or a Saturday early and kill it on a Sunday night. So we'll see how that ends up going. But that was some of the criticism I've heard. Normally, what I hear of from reading and listening to people is they say this phrase like they all have talking points, the same talking points, but it's like this is a step in the right direction. It's like this whole cautiously optimistic about EVE Online. Like people really pick up that groupthink, which is kind of funny to hear people using things described the same way over and over again. It's like I don't know. It's just kind of notable. Okay, but let's go on here. I'll go ahead. Do you have it in front of you? Are you a good reader? Do you want to read this? If not, I can do it.
I have it in front of me. I'm a good reader. Well, we'll find out, I guess.
We'll find out, right? You can't be any worse than me.
Okay. Want me to take it from the top?
Yeah, it's from the top.
Coming on the 10th of December, alongside the free market release, are the latest in a set of improvements to core gameplay, this time focused on structures and time zone tanking. This update is called Kicking Over Castles. In this update, more control over vulnerability timers is moved into the attacker's hands with the aim of making fights more common and Tuesday alarm clock ops rarer. This update also includes improvements to combat offensive structure spam and tethering in factional warfare systems. And don't forget, this update follows up on the Ansiblex and Tenebrex anchor range changes from November by putting any gates or Sinojammers within 500k of a structure offline. The changes to structures coming in Kicking Over Castles are as follows. Defenders can no longer choose a day of the week for exiting the whole reinforcement cycle, Structures will exit reinforcement at the next available hour of the defender's choosing, plus or minus 3 hours, after the following durations: wormhole space, 1.5 days; low and null security space, 2.5 days; high security space, 4.5 days. Updated vulnerability windows now takes 30 days to take effect instead of 7. In a solar system where the activity defense multiplier is above 4.0 and where an infrastructure hub is held by an alliance, pilots that are not members of that alliance will be unable to deploy medium upwell structures. That includes Astra Houses, Athenors, and Retarus. The random jitter range on reinforcement exit times is increased from +2 -2 hours to +3 -3 hours. Faction warfare structures now may not tether in some circumstances, according to a chart that's linked here on the dev blog. I can try and read that out, I
No,
guess.
I'll just show the chart and then we can describe the chart at a later time. Let's keep going through the points, though.
Mm-hmm. A ship piloted by the attacking faction or their ally can never receive tether from any structure whilst in enemy faction warfare space. A structure owned by the attacking faction or their ally can never provide tether to any ship whilst in enemy faction warfare space. Antiplex Jump Gate and Tenebrax Sinojammer service modules will be offlined if the structure is within 500 km of another structure. This is the conclusion of the Antiplex anchoring range changes initiated in Beat Around the Bush. These changes will increase the chance of fights taking place and improve the experience around destroying undefended structures. Let the kicking of castles commence.
Great. Thanks for reading that. So Beat Around the Bush, it actually is Boosh, B-O-O-S-H, in case you're not familiar with that. And that is a fun term for, I guess what in other games is called blinking, where you short space teleport, basically, from one area to another. So that wasn't a misreading or anything. Thanks very much. That was great reading. Let's go back and go through these points here. So it looks like to me here is, let's go to the first point here. Defenders can no longer choose a day of the week for exiting the hull. The hull is the final timer, right? When they destroy your hull, the actual structure is destroyed. Same with ships. And that's a reinforcement cycle. There are three of them. They're shield, armor, and then hull. So this is about the last timer. Structures will exit reinforcement at the next available hour of the defender's choosing, plus or minus 3 hours after the following durations. Okay, so what this is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dalakar, is from the armor timer, this is how many days passes, give or take 3 hours, where the structure becomes vulnerable to destruction. And it's different for wormhole space, low and null security space, and high security space. And high security space has the most time, and that's 4.5 days, whereas null and low sec have 2.5 days. And this is interesting. Wormholers have the worst or shortest amount of time, and that is a day and a half, 1.5 days. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, for starters, I think you got it right. I think my understanding is the same. But in terms of how I interpret this, I'm in shock. I thought they'd never do this. Not because I didn't have faith or anything like that, but just because for me, this is a huge, huge step. And so what this does essentially makes it so that low and null security space, reasonably speaking, now can sort of pick when the climax battles will occur. Empires kind of have this thing where when they want to end a war or set a tone or let's just say improve the morale of their troops, right? They'll try and make a set piece battle or a critical battle for their line members. I know that it worked really well for us in test when we dropped a keep star in nearing the ending of our war, and the enemy made some decisions on how they'd respond to it, and we sort of made this huge form up effort where we put a bunch of people online. We said, hey, it's not takeoff from work, but it's if you want to call in a sick day because you really like Eve.
It is, but it
Stuff like
isn't.
that. Yeah. It was like, don't actually. But we have a scale, and so it was like a 3 out of 5 on the scale, right? Which is definitely don't be in the Rorqual belts. Don't be doing anything other than this right now.
Mm.
But yeah, so it was big for us. It created a lot of momentum, and the only reason we were able to do that was because of the ability to pick the day at which it was happening on, uh,
Because you were the
and
one
because
putting
we
it
could
down.
anchor it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Right.
so what this does is this sets a set piece battle for
For attacks.
yeah, for basically for an empire to be able to say, okay, we can get it done on a weekend now. We can set these up where it isn't just anchoring timers. Now the enemy, and we could see like an X-47 again, which is a battle that I'm referencing that has to do with where all of the north and all of the south. Well, maybe not the south. Two major groups went head to head, Titan battle. We got it all. It's supposed to be huge, and it was huge. And that was because essentially both sides could sort of show up to the timer, right? That's sort of what I'm envisioning here. Why is this a big deal? Because now timers are manageable to a point where you can set it up to give your guys and gals a huge fight.
Mm-hmm. So to look at it from both directions, as a defender, you had the ability to kind of dictate when your structures would become vulnerable and when you could defend them. And you would normally want to put that time when most of your guys were on. But it turns out players did the opposite. They said, I'm betting that I can't get enough players to defend this, so I'm going to stick this in a time zone where nobody shows up to EVE Online. It's a dead time zone where very few things are happening, and it make it incredibly uncomfortable for attackers to actually destroy my structure. And that's what is called time zone tanking. You're essentially hiding the vulnerability windows in a time zone that is very, very sparse. Two things that have changed. One is a lot of players are upset. A lot of attackers want to be able to dictate the terms of the vulnerability of the thing they're attacking. The other thing is, pardon me, that time zone itself is changing because Korean localization, that means Korean language in the game, has allowed a lot of Koreans to play in their native language. And so you see a lot of people filtering in that late time zone, which used to be what we called Australian time zone, which is also, because Australia is near Korea, is generally, and China, the same time zone. So there's two different things that are pressuring the game a little bit, which is interesting. And this is, again, the first one, which is the attackers have put a lot of pressure, saying there's not enough activity in the game. And the reason is we can't attack structures because people don't want to wake up at Australian time zone, which would be what, between 3 and 4 a.m. for the Pacific time, which is even earlier for Eastern time U.S. players. Those guys don't want an alarm clock to wake up in the middle of the night to fight a battle to take out one of these structures. They're just not in that phase of their life anymore, most of the players in these big alliances.
Yep.
That is why they're saying things aren't happening because you're making us have to wake up in the middle of the night to make it happen. And the reason it's in the middle of the night is because other players on the defensive have said, that's where we're going to put our vulnerability cycle. And so this is an answer to that. So now you can dictate as an attacker, not just your own structures, because you would be the defender if they were your own structures, but as you're attacking somebody else's structures, you can queue it up for a weekend fight so that all your guys could participate at 10 a.m. in the morning when they're ready. I think what's interesting here is, again, it's not quite enough for some of the fighter FCs that I've talked to who say, look, I still have to wake up in the middle of the week, in the middle of the night, in order to prepare it for a Saturday or Sunday showdown. And if I don't want to do that, if I want to make the preparation over the weekend, in other words, we wake up we play the game on a weekend and take on a structure and knock it through its armor timer, then the final timer is going to end up during the week anyway, so we'd have to alarm clock for that. So it really didn't solve their problem the way that they wanted it solved. They want to be able to knock it into reinforcement on a Saturday and come back the next day and destroy it. That way they can do it all on one weekend when they're actually playing the game, and then they don't have to wake up in the middle of the night to do anything.
Yep. And I wanted to comment real quick on the availability of people to be able to alarm clock. I think it's important that Eve strike a balance, and I'm not sure what the appropriate balance is, but in my personal opinion, I think that having to alarm clock for Eve is okay in some moderation, but as we go on in terms of age, the people who did the big battles where alarm clocking was important now, aren't in college or have families, have kids, or simply aren't interested in, waking up at 1 a.m. to go and reinforce something. So I think it's important as a good life balance between gaming and whatnot to not necessarily have to make that judgment call of, oh well, my coalition needs me. Do I get up at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m.?
Mm-hmm.
Do I spend my Saturday morning being up super super early and then again on a Tuesday or whatever? It's a question that I kind of hope we can get away from having to ask, because I think it limits the availability for some people to really enjoy empire building. Although I don't have any statistics to back that up, I know I personally would be kind of turned off by that idea. I'd be like, do I really want to? Do I really want to spend, the next 3 months in a war where all of the times are going to be something that I have
Yeah,
to wake up super early for? I'm
maybe
not so
not.
sure.
Maybe not as an FC, right? But well, let's
Oh yeah.
welcome Ash Tarathi. Popped in. How you doing, Ash?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. We just got started here. We're talking about the whole timer shift from uh, I don't know what it was at, but it's now at 1.5 days for wormholers, 2.5 days for low and null sec security, and then high sec gets a 4.5 days. There's a couple of assumptions there. That I just want to clear up. Not everybody is aged out of the ability to wake up in the middle of the night. There's always new players coming to the game. It's the leaders that don't want to wake up in the middle of the night, because they're the ones that have been here a long time and have grown into this other routine in their life. So in order for them to lead a thing, they don't want to have to wake up at all hours of the night. What you used to do in EVE Online is, this is a 24-hour game where you would make alliances with people of different time zones, and that was called an alliance that had full coverage of time zones. That meant they had a US contingency, an EU contingency, and then you had an Australian contingency, and they could, around the clock as a group, maneuver these kinds of things. And that's why Australian time zone players were very, very valuable, and what gave someone like Sword Dragon a boost, because he became a very powerful broker in that dead time zone. That is changing quite a bit. Anyway, Ash, what's up?
Hey, yeah, I was actually just thinking about faction warfare, right? Because faction warfare has a lot of time zone coverage issues. If you're not there running the plexes at any given time of the day, then your enemy is, and therefore time zone coverage is absolutely essential to any kind of militia movement. But that actually is very different from what we're seeing here, because in that case you have some external pressure, you have this external requirement that's pushing onto you that's saying, hey, if you're not covering these areas at this time, then they will come under attack. But what we see with when it comes to time zone tanking is almost like a suicide pact, right? Like, we've agreed that we don't like to defend our stuff, and therefore we've decided that we're going to make it as hard for our attackers as possible, understanding that if our attackers do come, it will also be as hard for us as possible to defend it. And that just doesn't feel like a very fun situation for anyone. And that doesn't sound like the same sort of alarm clocking that used to make, fuel the wars of old, right? Like, I remember when I was in the military, every morning when we were out in the field at dawn, we would wake up and everybody would turn on their trucks simultaneously. and wait for a half an hour, or maybe it was 5 minutes. I don't remember, but it was called stand to.
Hmm.
And the idea behind it is that if a military form was going to attack, they generally did it at dawn or dusk, right? At these transitionary times, at times of confusion. And so this idea of like attacking your enemy when they're weakest and whatnot makes a lot of sense. But again, that is not what's happening here. You are using the assumption that it is too inconvenient to attack you as your defense, as opposed to actually defending it. And so I
Yeah.
think that difference needs to be
Well,
kind of separated out.
and another thing about that is that that difference works at all scales. So you could be a group of 10, and that defense is equally as powerful as if you're a group of 200 against a group that is usually 1,000. So it's an armor that everyone would put on, is making it inconvenient to be attacked because it works at all scales. You could be one guy with one structure and you want to avoid being destroyed. Well, you just put that vulnerability timer at a time when it's inconvenient for anybody to attack you.
Right. Instead of being what it was supposed to be, which is
Yeah.
like basically saying, these are the times I'm willing to defend my stuff. It's become, these are the times that I'm betting are going to be inconvenient to attack my stuff, which is
Which leads
which doesn't,
to,
again, that makes a bad situation. It just makes a bad game and not very fun scenario.
it also leads to what people complain about, which is structure spam. So now a group that has 3 people in it and shouldn't be able to defend a structure on the map looks exactly the same as a group that has 50. And so you have, because of that, every body will put their structures down because they're relatively safe. And you have what's this thing called structure spam, where there's just too many structures all over the place, too many safe spots, too many tethers to help ships be invulnerable in certain areas. And I think that's what some of the complaints are. There's too many structures, and these structures give too much benefit during fighting. So we should probably go to the next thing here, which is, because I'm glad you're here because we want to talk about faction war. But the next thing is updated vulnerability windows takes 30 days to take effect instead of 7. Delacar, do you know what that is?
Yeah, so I I actually
Glad
I
you
chuckle
do.
at this because we got we had a keep star killed because of this, or this mechanic specifically, not this change, but this mechanic. Um, Essentially, what happens is when you want to move, I believe that what this means is when you want to change the time at which your vulnerability, like the day, well, previously the day and the time, when you
Yeah.
would go to change that from whatever the basic current one, which I think is like 1800 on a Saturday, um, it now, instead of it taking a
Oh,
week to change, now it takes an entire month to change, which is big
yeah.
because part of the prep work that goes into starting a war with someone is the scouting that occurs. And when you go and you find out what all their timers are, you sort of get an idea of how you're going to need to plan your war. But if they can change them all within a week, you can't get to all of their structures within a week. It's just not feasibly possible unless outnumber them 3 or 4 to 1 or something along those lines, where it didn't matter what they set it to. So when the first fraternity war between Test and Winterco, started out, we had a keep star that was not timed properly. It wasn't timed for our EU prime. I don't remember
When you're
exactly.
mostly on.
Yeah, when we are at our coalition's strongest, and we paid for that by that keep star dying because essentially our enemies brought enough allies, and we brought our guys and our allies, and we couldn't measure up to their numbers. So yeah, this is interesting. The 30-day change, that means that
It's even harder for you.
well, in that sense, yes, but again, that's part of the game, right? Is if you don't pay attention to these minor mechanics, well, not minor, but these mechanics as an empire builder, you're not doing your due diligence. Similarly, there's sort of a guarantee-ish now that when you go and invade someone's territory, that all their timers aren't going to be set to a time zone you can't contest. Because let's say you look at them and you go, oh, look at that. They've got them all in our prime time.
Mhm.
That means you've basically guaranteed 30 days where you're going to be able to fight over a relevant timer.
Okay, so they're stuck for 30 days. If they want to change that to a deep Australian time zone that nobody's on, that's going to take 30 days. It used to take 7 days. So that means for 30 days, you can assault them with the timers that they actually have. And you can discover those timers how?
By going to them and hacking them with a data or relic module.
Okay, so there's something that you could do by sending scouts to the structure to hack it and find out what their actual vulnerability timer is. And that allows you to know what the intended target's vulnerability timers are. And they can't change those now for 30 days. It used to be 7. Okay, the next thing. In a solar system where the activity defense multiplier, better known as ADMs, is above 4.0, and where the infrastructure hub is held by an alliance, pilots that are not members of that alliance will be unable to deploy medium upwell structures, and that is the Astrohouse, Arthanor, and Reitaru. And here is what is not on that list. Asbels, large structures. Asbels, those are engineering structures, or fortizars, those are citadel structures. So the point is, for this change, if you have a well-defended system that people can't just do what's called cockroach motelling, which means putting down a lot of little structures to base themselves out of. They cannot put those down if they are not in the alliance that owns the iHub in that structure, in that system. Well, this is a big deal because one of the tactics that invading groups would use is to, again, put down a bunch of Astra houses, totally cheap. I think they're like 600 million. So they could spam or put down 20, 30 of those things if they wanted to without it being a real hit to their military budgets. And that would essentially entrench them into any system that they wanted to be entrenched in. And that's again, with tethering and everything else, it lends a lot of leeway to the attackers. So that's their move there. Now, some of the complaints I've heard here are, oh, okay, for little skirmishing groups that want to come into an area and have a foothold, this is what they would do. They would deploy an Astra house. So now they can't do that for well-maintained systems. But rich alliances can, because they can drop a Fortizar. It doesn't hurt them as much as it hurts a little guy as far as money goes. After listening to Vili and Harvey of Peak talk, it doesn't seem like this would be a big problem because even large alliances don't want to spam Fortizars everywhere. But we'll see. If that actually starts to happen, I think you'll see complaints saying balancing on ISK is not a good way of balancing. In other words, the rich get a pass because they have enough money for it not to hurt them, but the poor are locked out of that strategy. And that is not a good way to balance the game. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think that there's already an advantage to dropping Fortizars over Astrahuses if that's what if that's what you have the money to do. If you're willing to drop 80 billion ISK for the hull or for the just the structures themselves for 10 of them or whatever in order to secure a system, clearly you really really want it. Mm-hmm. That being said, this is only for ADM4 systems. These are like core used valuable systems. This isn't a fringe. This isn't a system that's been burned or scorched by hunters stopping the ratters and mining. This is an established in the walls town that is actively being used. Yeah. And so I would say that for those skirmishers, burn the land before you attempt to take it over with your invasion.
Basically, this is capital systems, which can be declared by a group, get a +2 on their ADMs. So that would almost ensure that any capital system is going to have ADM 4s, so they'll be better defended. But also the systems that are nearby are usually where they farm, right? The ratting systems where they go and they kill things for money. And those systems will have high ADMs too because that's where the activity is happening. That's where they're mining and that's where they're ratting. And I suppose the further you go out from those capital systems, the more likely you are to run into a system that doesn't have the occupancy activity to keep it with high ADMs, and those are the ones that are most vulnerable. But there will always be pockets inside of empires, quote unquote empires, that are not up to ADM 4s. It depends on the activity.
This actually has a side effect though, which I
Mhm.
find really interesting. And you might be able to correct me on this one, but when we took space in Cloud Ring, one of the things I noticed was that there were a lot of people who would take the system but then not flip the iHub, because by doing so you reset their strategic index. So to keep the ADM high, they would just take the system and then just start occupying it without necessarily changing the actual sovereignty holder. And this seems like this mechanic would actually prevent that from being easy to do. Now you actually have to clear off the previous owner and put your own on, so that way you count as being the owner and can anchor your own stuff. Is that correct?
I defer to Delacar for that. I was reading comments.
Yeah, so was I.
Oh, okay.
Actually.
Let me try again. Okay,
right.
so when you take over a system,
Yeah.
it is owned by a person, and that they have like a territorial claim unit that's giving them ownership.
TCU.
When you take it over, you don't necessarily want to take over their TCU. You don't want to destroy their TCU and put up your own, because their strategic index would be wiped out to 0.
Mhm.
No,
So
the strategic index is
Yeah.
tied to the iHub.
Yeah, only the iHub.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then it's the iHub then.
Yeah.
Well, okay, and so the reason why you would want to take control of the iHub, let's just say you want to live in a system. You want to live there really badly, but someone else owns the iHub and the TCU. The TCU at this point doesn't matter. The iHub, on the other hand, is where all of your upgrades that you do care about come from. Your ability to Cyto jam that system, your ability to connect it via a jump gate, all that kind of stuff. Upgrade it so you can rat in there. The Pirates Love Me upgrade, or whatever they call the thing.
Right.
Yeah, all of that comes from the iHub, and that is the driving force behind why you'd want to control the iHub
and
until this.
Sorry, go ahead and finish.
So I was just going to say this now with the ADM being tied in and the fact that you don't own it means that instead of being able to, let's say, have a bunch of space that you rent out to someone where they don't need the iHub and they're not in your alliance, now that's a bit of a problem, because now they can't anchor anything, and you'd have to now provide them the structures to live out of instead of letting them live out of their own structures.
So in the near past, there have been the fights have really shifted away from structures and towards iHubs. That's where the big fights are pivotal, and it looks like that trend will continue with this. It makes them more important than ever. The other thing is that the TCU doesn't mean anything except that it lowers your fuel costs on structures. So it's a flag that paints your name on the system, at least for all recording in the game and outside of it. But it's a little bit of a vanity thing, but it also reduces your fuel system. So it has no strategic function. All the strategy and the defense all comes from the ADMs, from the iHubs that are in the ADMs. Sorry,
yeah,
the reverse.
I have originally, which is so. But is that so? It's true that, like, I remember we took over. There was a system that was taken over, and it was like still the old person, but that's because we didn't want to wipe the strategic index out to 0 and start over again, and it didn't really matter. And I think so that must have been the iHub and not the TCU.
Yeah. Now, I'm not sure about this, but you cannot transfer iHubs, right? You can only self-destruct them. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is my understanding as well.
So you always have to restart. If you come in and give ownership to somebody else, even if it's agreed upon, you cannot just hand it over to them. They have to build up the indexes themselves. Indexes, again, are the ADM, the multipliers. We can get into how ADMs work, but we'll spare you that, and you probably already know. But that maybe we could do on a different show. So I like the idea of territorial claim units being different than iHubs, because it kind of leaves like a hollowed out feeling. That's why you still see old groups like Skill You on the map for a while, because they've left the territorial claim unit there. They haven't changed it over or bothered to change it over for whatever reason. It's kind of neat. It looks, you can see a little more decay after somebody's gone and no longer an influential player. And I kind of like that. It doesn't it feel like, oh, we're walking through the forest and there's a dead elephant. Don't go near it. But, it's going to take some time to disappear off the map.
It's like an old withered sign on the side of the road for the town. It's no longer there.
Yeah, everybody's gone from that town, but I just love that feeling of that texture of there's things that are being birthed and there's things that are in decay, and there's, it's not just all like, real time. This is the state of things, real time. Here's all the information all at once. Anyway, okay, let's move on to the next point. So that was we just talked about the activity defense multiplier. And by the way, you should know that has 3 components to it. There's a strategic component to it. There's, I guess, a commercial component to
Military and industrial.
Industrial component, yeah. And there's a military. And then there's, which one is the time? Is that the...
So the first one, the
that's strategic.
Strategic, okay. So you guys explain that, because I just screwed it up.
I'll let you do it.
Okay. Basically, the first component, strategic component, how long have you owned the iHub? And that gets interfered with if it dies, aka destroyed, also known as your enemies came in and took control of it. The second component, which is military index, is how many NPCs have died. That's it. Have you killed a lot of NPCs? Congratulations, your military index is now through the roof.
That's ratting, basically.
Yeah. Yep. Doing the anoms and all that kind of stuff. Any NPC that dies in there actually counts towards that, with the exception of, I think, diamond rats. I'm not quite sure on that one. Anyway, the third one is the industry index, where depending on how much you mine, it continues to go up. So if you have like 10 rorquals in there for an hour, I think you can hit maximum in one go. And so it's just, are people in there? Are they doing the 2 activities that CCP deems as important towards protecting the system? And if so, you're going to get an activity defense multiplier of 6.0, which is the maximum. And that essentially means that if I take me and my Tristan and my Entosis module, and I go to the iHub and I want to Entosis it because I want to own the system now, it's going to take me 6 times longer than it normally would to cycle on that iHub, which is a serious time commitment.
It's a multiplier, right? The normal times whatever the ADM is your multiplier. Okay, so let's go on, though, to the next thing. Thanks for breaking that out. Random jitter, we can skip this one, but it's basically a little bit of an increase between the variations. If something was going to exit at noon, before it could exit 2 hours before, 2 hours after noon. But now it's going to be increased to 3 hours. So it's just a little wider area where it actually comes out. And that means as an opposing and as an attacker, you have to wait for a 6-hour window that you're looking at instead of a 4-hour window. 2 hours before, 2 hours after. I think that's how it is.
Well, this is the thing that directly speaks against time zone tanking, right? So it used to be that I can say, okay, well, it's going to happen within this 4-hour window of time. That's when all my defense timers are going to happen. And now they're saying, no, it has to be within a 6-hour window of time, which is for a lot of organizations a much bigger ask for what kind of win, because that 6 hours is basically larger than any one prime time range. So it's far more likely that something will come out just at the end of your active time or right before your active time, or be just a little bit inconvenient for you, as opposed to what we were talking about earlier at the beginning, which was the no day manifestation. And that's just basically, you say it can't be on Tuesday. It's going to be in 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is. This is just saying, how much control do you have on when on that day it will be?
Okay, now let's take a look at this faction war chart, because they wanted to make some changes to faction war, and I think they have. I'll make it bigger for people who are watching. Let's go through this. I'm not sure I understand. I do understand what's going on here, but I'm not sure I know how to explain this very well. Ash, you're someone familiar with faction war. What do you think's going on here?
Sure. So let's first of all start with the problem. Okay. Faction warfare has what's known as sieges, where we attack a specific system that the opponent does not want us to flip, and we have to basically be running these complexes day in, day out until the contested value gets pushed all the way up to vulnerable, and then we can flip the iHub, right? That's how sieges work. Well, in faction warfare, there's a thing called station lockout, where if you are on the Caldari side and the Galente take your system, boom, you can't dock in the station anymore, even if you could before. If you were neutral, you could. If you were part of the allying system, you could. If you were in high sec, you could. But in faction warfare low sec, by joining faction warfare, you are volunteering to get locked out of stations and systems that your side doesn't control. And what this does is it makes it so that those sieges are far more difficult for the attacker. They actually have to come from a different system and then reship there and then come in to continue their attack every single time that they die. Well, with structures, you could just drop the structure into the system and then be assaulting out of the structure, thereby undermining that station lockout. And what we've discovered is that regardless of how good you are, both the Galente and the Caldari attacked and sieged each other. And it just, after a long enough timeline, 5-6 days, a week and a half, the defenses will fall, right? Like, you just cannot defend yourself indefinitely against a siege if the structure is within the system itself. So that's a big problem. It's been one of the biggest problems in faction warfare in the modern years, and it's one of the things that people point at as being like the reason why faction warfare is in a bad state now as opposed to a good state as it was before Citadels. So now let's talk about the solution. The solution here is that they are basically adding tethering to the same concept of the lockout for faction warfare members. So now, if you are a faction warfare member and you are in a system that you do not own, in other words, you are attacking that system. I'm a Caldari person in a Galente system. I can no longer tether on any structure whatsoever. And if I have a structure in that system, it cannot tether anyone whatsoever. So if I take a system, if I'm a Galente person, I take a system from the Caldari, suddenly all of their structures no longer can tether. It's not perfect. It's not the same as like station lockout, but it does significantly change their ability to defend their structures, to continue to reship, to keep eyes on the field, et cetera, et cetera. That combined with the first change, which was the day of the week change, which makes it so that now instead of up to 2 weeks, it used to take up to 2 weeks to clear off an enemy structure if they timed their time zone, their tanking well. Now it will at most take 5 or 6 days to clear a structure. And honestly, like 5 to 6 days is a decent amount of time to survive a siege. So I'm not promising that all the problems are solved, but the correct pieces are in place now that I believe that with a dedicated effort, faction warfare conflict could occur in a interesting way again. So that's the hope.
Great. Okay. And looking at this chart, is there a way to verbalize it?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So if you are in the militia that is not owning the system, you cannot tether on any structures no matter who owns it, and your structures cannot tether anyone no matter who they are.
Okay.
That's it.
I got it. So that's what this chart kind of says. Thanks for shortening it for us. Couple more bullet points here. And these seem to be, I don't know if they're related to the chart or not, but it is a ship piloted by the attacking, that is according to the chart. So we'll just leave those there. This is the last point then, and that is the, Dalakar, can you read that last point? And Sibylex jump gate?
Ansible jump gate and Tenebrax Sinojammer service modules will be offline if the structure is within 500 km of another structure. This is the conclusion of the changes that they wanted to initiate around beat around the bush. And if I might add.
Mm-hmm.
This is pretty big. I can tell from firsthand experience that a lot of the war that we just fought with Winterco, um, if we got the chance to go after a jump gate or a jammer, when either they chose not to form or they couldn't form because they were busy somewhere else, we did. They're important targets, and being able to move them away from keepstars and fortizars that can help defend without having a fleet on grid, you can defend them with these structures theoretically in the past. Um, this allows that to no longer happen. What this means is if you want the arteries of your network and the bricks in your wall to continue to keep the enemies out and to continue moving your people through, you're going to need to form every time they come to smack them. Because, for example, the gates, they only have 2 timers, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Shield and armor go in 1, and then it's a structure timer. And you can, if you can turn off an enemy's gates to be able to quickly move their stuff through, that's like crippling a supply line. If you can kill a Sino Jammer, that's like I don't know, outflanking your opponent, because what happens is no matter what in war in nullsec, someone's going to feel like they have the upper hand because they supposedly, in quotes, air quotes here, have either a bigger capital force or a better capital force. And if you have a bigger capital force, essentially what a Sino Jammer says is, okay, well, before you get to use the giant hammer with which you wish to crush my empire with, I'm going to make you get in a bunch of subcaps and come in here and try and destroy the jammer. And it, it was it's an ongoing question of how do we deal with jammers, because there can be multiples anchored, ready to be turned online. You can down them. Sorry, I should appropriately say you can turn them off and then turn them back on rather quickly, so that you can take advantage of it. And all of this, strategic gameplay comes out of these jammers. And so the inability to defend both of these structures with a Keepstar or Fortizar or just something that can shoot back that isn't in a fleet is a big deal. And so the departure from that supposedly will, put us in a direction that means, okay, you want to defend your empire. Well, hopefully it's not so big that you can't get to where you need to go. Or hopefully you've got it all timed at the right time so that all your guys can get on to go and defend it.
Right.
I want
Go ahead.
to touch on one of those points that you
Mhm.
were going, because you made a good point, but I want to just stress the fact that these things are flex structures, which means that they only have 2 timers, which means after they've been hit the first timer, if they're successfully reinforced, they immediately go into low powered mode, which means they turn off.
Mm.
So it's not even a matter of destroying the jump gate. If you can even reinforce it, then that means that the enemy cannot use it until they've successfully re-onlined it, which is requires its reinforcement process. So, this is not a non-trivial deal. And if you need a point of how big of a deal this is, let's just remember the drifter attacks. And when that one Ensilibix died because it happened to be in low power already, and everyone lost their minds because this was like the crux of how nullsec works.
Yeah, it was important to them, but it was also important because it was a signal that NPCs could actually destroy a thing, which hadn't happened before.
Correct. But I'm just saying, like, the threat of these Ensilibix being hit by those things in particular was extreme.
And I think that was the only thing. That was the only casualty of drifters, wasn't it?
I think it was the only major.
I think it was the only yeah, but everybody flipped out because they're like, "Oh my god, NPCs can kill stuff." They killed one thing.
Yeah, before it had to be the diamond rats, right? It had to be the either the forward operating bases in highsec or the CTOs in nullsec, which you can theoretically don't go and get rid of. But here it was this giant, "Ha! I am a drifter, and your structures are at my mercy because you can't be in every system, but I can."
Yeah, I think one of the big complaints was that although a structure cannot defend itself, which is, let's put that issue aside for a minute, somebody needs to be in it, but only one person needs to be in it. So if you have just one person that shows up and gets into the Citadel, they can actually fight off the people who are menacing your flex structure, your basic jump gate to another strategic system that you've placed there. So it's a strategic travel point for you guys, all defendable by one person in one structure. That is no longer the case because now these gates are out of range of those structures to be defended from. So now you've got to put bodies in space to fight off the people menacing your strategic travel points. And that's why that is such a big change. It's another thing to fight over. From an attacker's perspective, this is another way of drawing people out to fight you, because when you attack a structure, you are calling them out, and they have to come out in ships and face you, and you can bait people that way, or you can just call them out for a skirmish, and this is one of the reasons that they wanted that to happen. Now, originally, when this change was announced, people were excited about it, but there was a caveat that everything that was in place would be grandfathered in, and there was a ruckus about that through a lot of feedback that CCP got, that was not optimal because it meant that all the people who had done the work and put their flex structures down were going to have a built-in advantage. So they walked that change back and said, okay, all gates have to be moved, and if they are not moved out of range of those structures, they will be destroyed. And that's what is meant by the 500K.
Well, offline.
Oh, interesting. So they just offline it.
Right? Because it says all service modules.
Well, that's interesting. And I wonder if that's a point without distinction, or if why would you offline something if you weren't intending to move it?
Well, no. So the way it works is that as of this patch, all service modules on structures that are within the critical range will just be offline.
I'm sorry. They won't be destroyed.
Low power mode. Yeah.
So they won't be destroyed. They'll be made vulnerable to destruction. That's what you mean.
Correct. They could still technically, tear them down. And now, they've gotten their month or two of extra use out of them. Mm-hmm. And now they can tear them down and put them, 500 kilometers away.
Because this announcement came out in October at Eve Vegas. Okay, so that is the notes. I want to go to one more thing here. Let's see if I can bring it up on screen. And that is the we're still in Halloween mode. Wormholer's perspective on these changes is that this kicking over sandcastles expansion, we'll call it mini expansion, is a loss for wormholers. And I thought this was interesting. Their armor timer went from a half a day to a day and a half. Because I thought a day and a half, that's a coveted time, right? A day and a half. That's what nullsec wants. That would be great. That would make them happy. Wormholers had half a day. So they could attack something and then 12 hours later come back and finish it off. Because things are supposed to be a lot more insecure in wormhole space. You're not supposed to be essentially building empires in wormhole space. But because it's the wilderness, it's the wild. Another thing is
only wormholers would be given more power and then be like, this is a net loss.
Well,
this is kind of silly. I'm reading what he's writing here. Mm-hmm. I spent about a year in C4, C3 wormhole space mm-hmm. With my own corp. And we would go and we'd hunt low power structures to kill because they drop all the loot. And so it was pretty good income back when the changes were made. So when I'm reading this, I can tell the type of person that we're getting a little magnifying glass into their world and what we're looking at. This gentleman is essentially angry at the increased time commitment, I believe, is sort of the feeling I'm getting from here. Mm-hmm. But I think this is actually a step in the right direction, because when you're a wormholer and you want to kill someone's structure, if we go back to what Sword Dragon said, right? Why should somebody come back from a weekend and have nothing? Well, there's sort of like a joke in wormholer space, which is like the second you move something into a wormhole, it's already dead. It's just a matter of time. And so if you anchor a structure, expect that it'll die at some point. What we're looking at here, and what I think I disagree with, is that when the timers are longer and you have to commit to being in the system more, it just means that there's more opportunity for fights, because you're having to close down, which is a process of rolling all the entrances.
Yeah, blocking the exits.
Blockading the system. The longer you have to do that, the more there is opportunity for error, and the more there is an opportunity for the defenders to come out and fight you. So although this guy maybe feels that, this isn't going to benefit him. I think it benefits wormhole space overall. I'd love to hear someone like Exuki talk about this, because I think he has probably a really good idea of how it's going to impact high-level wormhole space, C5, C6. I expect that this is going to have a pretty interesting effect on the idea of, expunging someone from their system, or eviction, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, this is a bonus to defenders, isn't it? That they now the task to destroy something takes a whole day longer than it did before. So you've got to maintain what's called hold control that much longer. And this gives a defender a chance to raise a defensive army an additional day to ask allies to try to get into the hole to help them out.
I think that this is more than that, though, because if you think about it, the difference between same day and next day for a wormhole is literally universes apart, right? Because, like, let's say I wake up in the morning and I probe my hole and I find another hole, and that hole has
Crazy.
and that hole has some low powered Astrohuses. Well, I could go in there in the morning and knock on it, reinforce them all, and then that evening we could come and pop them, and then we can go back in the hole and be done for the day. But if I have to wait until tomorrow, I have another level of logistical concern, because now I am going to lock out of that wormhole. Like by the time I'm done with that operation, now my hole is no longer connected to that one. And so now I have to go through the whole process of getting all my crap back into my home system, instead of being able to just go in there, knock it over, pull everything out really quick, close the hole, and be done.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we're visited now by Wormholer. Teddy, how's it going?
Oh, thank God.
Somebody saved me.
Just trying devil's advocate.
Well, let's
give it a go.
Give it a go. Let's hear your perspective on this kicking over sandcastles. Do you have an opinion? Or is it too early?
It's good. It's good and bad. Like, it's nice getting another day, but then again, we lose the ability to pick the day, which was really nice, being able to pick the day and having like an increased level of time where stuff can get hit. Means that you need your dudes on for so much longer if you think you're going to get attacked.
Yeah. What about the other parts of kicking over sandcastles? Is there anything in there that affects you? I guess these structure defensive things affect everybody who's involved in structures, even high-sec people. But is there anything beyond the structure changes that you've looked at in here?
It's annoying that they've increased the time that it takes to destroy low power stuff. It was nice being able to just go in, kill low power stations in a hole, and just take it in like 24 hours.
Well, low power was the same as half a day, 12 hours. Is that?
Yeah, if you got the times exactly right, but I usually think of them as like 24 hours.
Oh, okay. And now it's increased to 2 days, basically.
I think it's around like 35, 36 hours.
Oh, so more than 2 days.
Yeah, which is just annoying, especially if it's an empty hole. Like if stuff is low power in a hole, it's usually either like it's completely abandoned or someone doesn't care about it.
Yeah, cobwebs. Somebody left it behind. However, you can't really utilize that system until you kind of clear that out in case somebody comes back, right? Or what's the disadvantage of having a dead structure in your system, just cobwebs on the wall?
I couldn't even think of anyone that would even bother to keep it up. Everyone in wormhole space that I know would just knock it down.
And why would you knock it down? To see what's inside, or is there is it a possible point of attack for somebody if you're in that hole?
It's kind of both. You don't want someone else's shit in your hole, and you don't, and you kind of want to know what's in there.
Yeah. Also joining us is Fonsui. How's it going, Fonsui? Might have walked away from his mic. Oh,
just listening in.
Oh, okay, good. Chime in if you want to. Uh, okay. Thanks very much, Teddy, for that. There was another thing I thought might affect you guys. Oh yeah, the idea that the defensive modifiers, if they get updated, takes 30 days instead of 7 days now. So it's much longer to change your vulnerability windows. Is that a big deal for wormholers?
I think it's more just annoying. I don't think it's a massive deal because most people have already got their stuff set. But for newer guys or people that are changing sort of time zones, I can imagine it'd be quite annoying.
Yeah. All right. Ash, I got to take advantage of you being here, and Fonsui as well. What's going on in the Triglavian world, I guess is the way to put it.
Oh boy.
Oh, it's a much bigger topic than a few minutes.
It's been kind of in a holding pattern. So the Dreads got released, and there is actually not just basically 2 encounters. So when we were first sold on this, it was like, which side are you going to join, the Empires or the Triglavians? And it's like, ooh, but it's actually 5 different encounters because each of the 4 Empire races have their own ships with their own E-War, their own resistance profiles, their own damage profiles, their own fighting tactics, etc., etc. The Amar fight like Amar, the Kaldari fight like Kaldari, and it's really, really interesting. That being said, there is a very annoying bug that occurred last week that basically makes it so that the Dreads have effectively 0 mass, and so can be bumped around like balloons on the battlefield. And this makes it so that the Revenant, no, not the Revenant, the Revelation that you were orbiting tightly to keep out of its tracking is suddenly 15 kilometers away from you and can track your basilisks just fine.
Oh, that's bad.
So we have certain nefarious organizations, or maybe dedicated organizations, depending on how you want to look at it, that are sending people in that are intentionally disrupting other people's attempts to do these sites. So then CCP fixed it over the weekend, but now we're seeing even more bizarre behavior with Dreads going into warp and staying immune for like over a minute and a half while they're doing so. Plus, there's still people that are able to bump them. It's just kind of a mess right now. So the sites themselves are really interesting. They're probably some of the best PvE encounters that we've seen so far, and I'll let Fonsui speak to that a little bit more. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to fully embrace the flow of Virage because there's just a few things that are getting in the way of smooth runs.
This actually happens to be something that I can speak on intelligently.
Right.
As opposed to the structure stuff, which is cool, but not my thing. These 5 different encounters are all entirely different. That includes the Triglavian one. If you side with the Empires and fight the Triglavians, which is an option in all sites, no matter where the invasion spawns, you can always choose to side with the Empires and get a consistent experience if you don't necessarily want to go out on a limb and learn a whole new composition, new tactics, etc. Even that Triglavian encounter is different than the other invasion content that we've seen so far. The emerging conduits, the minor conduits, the major conduits, the observatory flashpoint site, whether you're fighting any of the 4 empires or the Triglavians, is entirely different. There's a Dreadnought there, and it will kill you. You must deal with it. There are all sorts of different tactics that we're looking at and are being used, some which might work in some encounters and others which might work in other encounters. We're looking at bringing newts to PvE. Like, this is a whole thing.
Something you didn't do before.
Yeah, how do you kill a Dread, right?
Yeah, we're gonna newt out a Dread because we don't want it to rep, and maybe we can stop it from shooting if the guns use cap as well.
Dreadnoughts are bigger ships, so you neutralize their energy. They're not able to heal themselves, and then you're able to destroy them.
Yeah. So the Triglavian Dread has 1,000 hit points per second local rep on top of everything else.
All of the Dreads do.
Yeah. So the idea is
Nice.
that if we can newt it out, which we've calculated at approximately 2.5 minutes, which means right as it enters into its first siege cycle, we can have it be probably newted out, and we'll have to see what the effect of that is going to be.
Yeah, there's all sorts of other stuff that we're doing, like the Caldari. If you fight them, they all fire missiles, and they change it up. Some of them are firing explosives, some of them are firing EM, and and the Dreadnought fires thermal, and you have to account for all of these things. You can speed tank missile explosions, but very effectively. So we're trying out all sorts of different comps. We're having oversized props on medium hulls. We're using bombers. We're doing all sorts of cool stuff that we never did before in PvE.
Let me be
Yeah.
clear. Some people are mentioning that rats have infinite cap. It would seem as if rats post-Triglavians can be affected by newts. We still are testing the full extent of this.
Yeah.
They can be repped. They can be jammed. We haven't quite determined the exact effect of having newts, but from what we've been able to see, it can shut off their gun and it can shut off their reps. This is only true about Triglavians, but what is true about the Triglavians have now become true about the empires in these new sites.
Yeah, these specific Empire NPCs are brand new NPCs that were created by the Invasion dev team. They are not standard Empire rats that we've seen. And if you actually look at the attributes of these rats, which are available directly from ESI, you can pull the attributes; they're publicly available. These rats have specific capacitor capacities and recharge times and cost for running a repper. Sledgehammer designed these rats to really resemble players as much as possible.
That's CCP Sledgehammer, the dev that works on this.
Yeah, so CCP Sledgehammer is the lead of this particular team, which involves CCP Signal and others as well. And they have all actually been engaging with us very, very directly and very consistently on ensuring the quality of this.
Good.
We're actually really excited about the new policy with CCP to allow them to run with us in our sites. So that way they can get firsthand experience about how we fight in these various different locations.
Now, what's weird is I have a real institutional problem with players creating the game. And it's interesting. I don't seem to have that same reluctance with you guys. And not just because we're friendly, but it seems like you're evolving the NPC's intelligence and the way they work. And it doesn't feel competitive against you guys. Whereas when Nullsec tells CCP how to do things, and of course they don't because CCP won't do exactly what they want, but that impression is just awful to me. That makes me want to leave the game because the game is now gamed by the people who are playing.
Well, let me be clear. We're not telling CCP what we want. We're telling CCP what we're experiencing.
Right.
Most of the time, we will ask them,
Very
is
interesting.
This what is intended? Is this what you wanted to have happen? Because if you say yes, if you say you wanted this experience to be able to happen in this way, then boom, we have to deal with it. The question is this what you were expecting to have happen, or is what we're seeing something that is outside of the bounds of what was supposed to happen?
We are taking the angle of participating in the QA process and also providing feedback on the enjoyment of that particular content. That's opinion-based as well, and they want that information, and that's good. But not only is the primary information that we're giving them purely diagnostic, does it work, does it not work, this is what you want, this is not what you want. When we give them opinion-based information, it's clearly noted that this is our opinion, and the opinions that we are espousing are those of creating good content as opposed to creating an advantage for ourselves.
Yeah. And this might be why when I think of CSM members like Izuki and his presentation on wormholers and what they're doing, it didn't feel like it was a problem, as opposed to some of the changes we're seeing coming through the Talos group, through I'm thinking first names, but the CCP Rise, like those, the imagery, the appearance of conflict of interest seems stark compared to Izuki and what you guys are doing. And I wasn't able to figure out what the difference was, but I think you might have put your finger on it there, Ashtarothi. You're not actually advocating for positions. You're saying this is what our experience is. And that's what Exuki did with wormholers.
Right, because it's, I mean, in my opinion, it's not our position to necessarily tell CCP what experience they're trying to create. All we can do is, as players of the game, give proper feedback as to what experience we are having, thus that they can make the adjustments that they feel that they need to adjust.
Yeah.
If we're being frustrated by a specific mechanic, it could very well be that that mechanic is intended to be frustrating, such that something else can either alleviate that frustration or to provide some sort of reward for something else. Like the fact that ratting is boring is a feature, not a bug, right? Because it makes it so that what you do with that money is valuable because you've actually invested something in order to be able to have it. So by just saying, oh, well, we should have money easier, like that defies the actual logic behind the design in the first place. So instead of trying to speak to what should be happening, we speak to what is happening and whether or not we consider it quote unquote fun. One of the perfect examples of this was that after months of doing the World Arc, I had a conversation with people right after one of the World Arcs where I said, you know what, I don't know if I'm having fun with the World Arcs anymore, right? Like if this is just the way it's going to be, I don't know if we're going to be able to continue to do it. And this led into like this 2-hour deconstruction, not just of like, yeah, the World Arc sucks, but like really, what are the pieces of this? Because we wanted to do this. We know we want to do this. This is something that we enjoy.
In Discord with us. This was not with CC.
Yes, this was totally internal.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it was on stream, and I had this conversation with everybody where it was like, do we like this stuff? What don't we like about it? What parts of it are being frustrating, and why has the wind been taken out of our sails about doing this content? And so when it was all said and done, we had this 2 to 3 hour discussion that I just took in total and handed it to CCP, and they're able to review that and see in a very clear, stark way, or candid way, what was and wasn't working. And when you look at the Dread fight, you can see clear examples of where they took that feedback to heart. Number one is Fonsui's number one thing since Invasions has begun is the fact that none of the previous Invasion sites has required any form of mobility. Every single site has just been anchor on the pat rat, fire at targets as necessary. The Dread warps in at 80 kilometers. If you're not moving in this site, you're dead. So there are several different, you warp in, there's a gate at 40 kilometers away. You get through the gate. There's a structure like 20 kilometers away. There's things warping in from all over the place. The Dread warps in from 80 kilometers away. Once the Dread dies, then 2 other pylons come. So the whole fight is about these periods of repositioning, so it's adding another layer of complexity into the game based on exactly what feedback was saying. What?
You have to fly around and activate 7 different pylons after the Dread.
Correction, 7 people have to activate the pylon. There's only 2 pylons total. I know, I was confused by that the first time I saw it too.
Well, tell us about the Dreadknots. I heard the skill books haven't dropped yet. Is that true?
So from my understanding, everything is dropping, but there's 2 problems. One, for the first week, they were dropping less frequently. But also, as I said, Wang's in particular
That's a group.
was, the organization, what is it? Ardraw or Wangs or, snuffed out, whoever you want to call them today. They have created this active thing where they're stopping anyone else from running these sites while bouncing between them themselves and running them in order to maximize their profit. But the problem was that last week they were the pro Empire side was dropping BPCs for the incredibly valuable loot that came out of the World Arcs just the week prior. So suddenly they were getting 2 to 3 copies of these 5 billion-isk modules every single run, and they're running 3 different sites.
It was more than that.
It was 2 to 8 blueprints per site. We have the best site we had got 8 blueprints total.
So my bad.
What's that actually mean? Break that down for us. So
the officer modules, the officer guns, and the officer damage modules were used to drop very infrequently in the World Arc sites from very specific rats in very low quantities as a module. Since the change, they are dropping as multi-run prints and in much greater quantities. So they are much more available. Yeah, they're much more available than they were before. That was one of the specific pieces of feedback that we gave CCP about the World Arc, that it was the only source for the faction damage mod, the officer damage mod, and the officer guns. And what was happening is that those items were inaccessible to everyone. People who were farming the faction, people who had the faction damage mods were unable to move them because they were so rare that their price was so high. It was literally 10 to 20 times the price of a regular faction damage mod. So nobody wanted to buy them. So they started making them drop more as a result of our feedback.
So that is Fonsway, and the voice that we heard before that was Cable. How's it going, Cable?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So I think I got a couple things confused. So the blueprints to build the Dreadnought are not what we're talking about here. This is
also drop as well from the other side of the site.
Right. Let me circle this back around.
Okay.
So both of those are the reasons why we haven't gotten very many of the skill points or blueprints, because A, the Zenitra blueprint and the actual skill books themselves had a lower than normal drop rate. But more importantly, B, no one was running that side because everyone was running the other side because it was dropping those other blueprint copies for the really, really valuable stuff.
Yeah.
So now people have started to run the first side, or the pro Triglavian side, and started to get the blueprints. I do know that within the first day, the gun skill book did drop. So they were dropping. They were just super rare and not very many people were running them. Now they are more common and more people are running them.
It has been confirmed, though, by Dev that only 2 had dropped, at least as of this Monday. Only 2 skill books for the Dread had dropped.
Yeah, they're tuning the drop rate up. So they said specifically the three items that they were tuning 3 items. They said they were tuning up the hull print itself, not the component prints, not the gun printer or the ammo prints. And they said the 2 skill books, the spaceship command book and the weapon skill book.
So what
we have gotten the ammo blueprint and the gun blueprint ourselves.
Okay, so what is missing is to build this Dreadnought, you need a blueprint that drops, correct?
You need 4 blueprints that drop.
Okay.
So you need to go and kill Empire repeatedly to get 3 blueprints for capital components, 1 blueprint for a hull. Then you need a blueprint for a gun, and each of the 3 different ammos has their own blueprint as well. All of these 8 separate blueprints drop from killing Empire and helping Triglavians. So you have to run that repeatedly and continuously to continue to get the ammo. And you may be going for ammo at some point because you have your Dread and you just keep getting component prints. So that's a problem number 1. Then, in order to build it, once you already have the prints, you have to run the other side of the site and kill the Triglavians, because because when you kill the Triglavian Dreadnought, it drops the items that you actually need to build it. So you have to run both sides repeatedly to build just one and to keep it firing.
I wonder if this is not why Nullsec is forming groups to do the conduits and do this high-sec stuff, because they knew that this is where the Dreads were going to drop and they need to get the pieces, so they need to get involved in high-sec in order to get this stuff instead of buying it at super high prices.
Empire space, because Null actually has a very strong advantage in that they can bring incredible force to the low-sec invasion footholds, which is where these sites spawn. So yes, they only spawn in the foothold, and some footholds are high sec, but some footholds are low sec, and you can bring your capitals. So if Null wanted these Dreads, they could have them probably already. I think they're sitting back on their laurels and waiting to buy them with all their ISK.
Interesting.
2 things about that. 1, clarify, you cannot bring your capitals into the actual fight itself. There is an acceleration gate 40 kilometers from the warp in, which brings you into the site. That being said, your capitals can definitely sit in that outside pocket and make sure nobody else comes in. The second thing is, I don't remember because I just lost it. Oh well,
happens all the time.
The point is, you can bring your capitals to protect yourself. You can bring and once you have that, you can bring all the bling you want into the site, so they can just crush these nonstop if they wanted to. They respawn every 90 minutes. they could
Wow.
have these dreads. They're just waiting. They're waiting for us to build them.
The second part is that the spawning of the invasion sites have been super wonky since this. Like everything has changed. The first week, things were spawning at about twice as long, or the cycle took about twice as long as normal. It stayed in Conduit's active, or the new one, Stellar Observatory is active, I think it is, for like 2 days, which is longer than normal. But they also all went into forces withdrawing at the same time. And once again, we this time we saw almost everything going to forces withdrawing again. Now I don't know if this is like some sort of expected behavior, like the Triglavians are now just doing these like joint strikes and then withdrawing at the same time in some sort of weird way, or if it's just like CCP going, crap, the dread still broke. Finish all the sites. We'll figure it out in 3 days when it gets back up to observatories.
We've seen before that when they when a major change is made to the invasion content, they reset all the existing invasions, and then the natural rate of progression of an invasion would be the same, but like a couple more sites are done in this one than that one, so this one finishes a bit sooner, so it takes a week or 2 or even 3 for the fresh new invasions to cycle differently, so that they're starting and finishing at different times. So for the first couple of weeks, they're all at the same state. This has happened once or twice before.
One of the questions here is from Cocat. How was Wang's preventing them from running the sites? How are they preventing you guys from getting the loot or running the sites?
Just bump the dread away.
They're bumping the dread. It was worse the first week. Nowadays it's theoretically reasonable. Okay, so the first time it happened, they were able to bump the dread, so it was going almost 2K per second.
Can't catch up to that.
You can't catch up with that, and it's going to be tracking you, so you're going to suffer. This time they only were able to bump it up to just under 1K. So
they got it up to 1700. I was watching, and the reason why we didn't die is because it wasn't a turret dread, it was a torp dread, and we were moving, so it didn't range didn't give it tracking on us.
Either way, when I watched it being bumped, it was at 900, but that's not actually the point. The problem at that point was that there was a secondary bug that was happening, which the dread was warping, trying to reposition like the rest of the rats, which basically becomes this 5-minute. It's now can't be locked because it's warping. Oh, look, it's now 400 kilometers away. Oh, wait, now it's back onto us. Okay, now we can lock it again. Oh, they bumped it again.
It would warp off, take several minutes to align and warp off, land, go into siege because the siege timer happened while it was in warp, stay in siege for 2 minutes out at 500 kilometers, then take several more minutes to warp back to us.
Can it be bumped when it's in siege, or is it immobile at that point?
Hard. It looked like once it was sieged, the bumps failed.
Okay, because the mass increase. But
yeah.
Well,
the problem is we've talked to CCP about this.
Okay.
It stems from the fact that when they warp in, they have the dread warp in. There's something about how, in order to make that warp work exactly correctly, they temporarily remove the mass from the dread, and then they restore the mass's dread when it lands. But originally it wasn't restoring that mass correctly, which meant it had no mass, which is why in that first week they were literally able to kill us with it. So nowadays it's something that might be manageable, but that first week certainly was not.
Okay, so because the mass application, meaning it's so heavy it can't move, wasn't correct, it could be bumped. And when it's bumped, it gets you can't catch up with it, and it has a better chance of hitting your smaller ships because it can track better at a distance. And that was destroying you guys. In addition to that,
it one-shots the Logi.
Yeah, it one-shot a Basilisk.
Wow, and that's a cruiser. And not only could it destroy you well, you couldn't catch up to it, but then when it was trying to rewarp itself to position itself, it became invulnerable. So that sounds like it's just a combination of things that made it really hard to get.
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's cool. I get it. Like, you want to deny your opponent your thing. We just weren't willing to engage in what seemed to be like broken mechanics. So we've stood down once again, and we're waiting for CCP Sledgehammer to tell us once again that it's working, and then we'll go test it again.
Okay. So but they weren't getting it either, right? Like nobody was getting it.
No. Well, now
they made it miserable until we left, and then they got it.
Right.
Oh,
If we were willing to do the same tactics on them, then no one would get it. But we're not going to waste our time doing that.
okay.
We're just going to
So
move on
I
to some
don't
other
I don't
topic.
care nearly enough about that ISK to engage in that frustrating gameplay. Like,
And let me
if
be
they
clear.
want the ISK, they can have it.
yeah.
Once the bug parts of it get solved, I am totally willing to engage with them on that kind of annoying gameplay. My problem is that when non-intended pieces are involved, I have a problem dealing with that strategically because I'm always thinking kind of more longer terms or whatnot. So I'll
Yeah,
just
yeah.
wait until the problems that are going to be solved are solved. And once CCP says this is the rules, then I will begin to engage with it and hopefully.
Yeah.
Plus, while
win.
this is
When
while this is going on, you guys are like, hey, wait a minute, there's this really lucrative thing going on over here. So let's just go do that in the meantime.
Yeah, exactly. There's too many things to do in this game for it to be like totally bummed that one thing isn't working right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Like if something is taking you a long time and you're not sure of the success, et cetera, you would do something that is lucrative. So you jumped on that. Now, Cable.
Yeah. And the other thing is that they are an organization that internally is trying to make money. And they're doing a very good job of that right now. They're making a ridiculous amount of money doing
Talking about
this.
Wangs, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Our organization is trying to provide content and teach and make money, but mostly get these experiences for players of all different levels of experience. And so if I set them up for failure, if I put them into a situation that's going to be unpleasant for them, that actually will have long-term ramifications on me and my organization. So I'd much rather kind of ferret us off to something that's going to be more exciting and interesting and productive.
Got it. Cable, you were actually running after some of these rare modules, right? You were part of that.
Oh yes.
Yeah. How good was the getting?
So around 270 billion
Total?
total.
Wow. 270 billion off these rare modules that were dropping with higher frequency than they should have been. Has that been fixed?
That's been fixed, yes, but the problem is that it's been fixed in such a slow pace. It
Mhm.
took about 3 days after I told them about it for them to actually fix it, which means that the market essentially has still not recovered and probably won't for a long time.
You know, I would hold those
Well,
modules because you have HyperNet Relay coming. Those things will sell for more there than they will on a market. Anyway, go ahead, Fonswitch.
Well, I think that the market is going to normalize around these items. They were essentially, so we had the old drop rate from the old source, the World Arc,
Mhm.
and now we have the new drop rate from the new site, and then we have the new drop rate, which is the slightly reduced drop rate from the new site, which is still higher than what we were getting in the World Arc. In other words, they tuned it up in order to reduce the price of each individual item. They tuned it up too high and dialed it back some, but not all the way. So the stabilization point that we're looking at for the Velez radiation sinks, the Zoria radiation sinks, and all three sizes of the Zoria guns, that stabilization point has not yet been reached, will be lower than what it was before. But what they were taking advantage of is people had buy orders, standing buy orders placed for incredibly high prices because
they were taken by surprise.
Yeah, they were based on the original value of these items, based on the original rarity. And those people are just market people. They're not running the sites. They don't know what's going on. They don't know that the drop rate was increased, and therefore the value is effectively, in theory, gone down, and they should reduce their buy orders. They didn't do that. So these things have been dropped onto existing buy orders for just piles and piles of cash. Those buy orders will dry up sooner or later, and may already have. This was a rush, and the rush was to get the most disc right off the bat before anything stabilizes. I think we're going to start seeing that stabilization happen within days or weeks.
Right.
I mean, we saw the rush end in like the first 48 hours. Like, I mean, it's completely true that we literally just rushed to sell into buyers. We literally had scepters burning from where we ran the sites to Jita
Just to
build
dump
the module and sell them instantaneously. Like, literally, I had a scepter burn like 900 jumps in one evening.
Because if you weren't doing it, somebody else was.
Exactly.
To really drive home the point that this was an intended increase, even if it wasn't that big of an increase, instead of dropping the module, now it drops multiple run blueprint copies.
Mm.
Only for radiation, for the sinks, though.
Right.
Only for
right,
the
but
things.
that's
The guns are single run.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
the guns should, so the guns are dropping more frequently, but haven't been doubled in production rate, and the rad sinks are dropping more frequently and have been doubled in production rate.
So this is a kind of a funny thing. Let me see if I can break down for people who are less experienced with the jargon. But you had an expensive item, and so people are placing orders saying, "I want to buy that album for, let's say, $2 billion," and that item totally starts dropping a lot more, or the ability to create them starts dropping a lot more, whether it's higher frequency, like it's dropping more often, or you get a blueprint that does not only one copy of the item, but 2 or 3 copies of the item. So you get 3 to 1 when you produce it. And everybody rushes to the market to build these things so that they can dump it and sell it to people who are still willing to pay $2 billion for it, when the frequency is now driving that price down to what should be like 500 million instead. And so that happened, and word got out, and eventually the marketers were like, "Oh my God, we're way overpaying for these things." How long did that take? 48 hours?
About 48 hours, and the prices were at a low enough point that we didn't want to sell to buy orders anymore.
What gets me is that your sureness of the rate of drop, or that it wasn't a fluke to say, yeah, sell.
It was a complete mistake that the drop rate was increased as much as it was.
But instead of hoarding
whether
it,
it was a mistake or not, the quantity of items that they had and the value of the standing cells just made it a clear decision. And once those existing standing cells were all eaten up, then you can reevaluate and say, like, should we try to do more of this? But the standing cells were like $5 billion or more for these things.
But I think it shows your experience, you guys in here, that know what you're looking at and know when an opportunity has presented itself. Because somebody might say, "Oh my God, look at this fluke! I just got a 3-run blueprint on this thing, and it usually is only 1. I'm going to hold on to this. This is very valuable," and you just sit on it because you think like it's a valuable thing. But you knew that you needed to act right away.
If something's worth a lot and it just got released, sell it.
Sell it. Right.
Right away.
I mean, it was a complete fluke that we actually figured it out, because we ran the site, and we'd run 2 or 3 sites in advance, and I was like, we should check these recs just for the shit of it. Check the recs and see if there's something valuable in them, because we didn't actually check any recs before, because we assumed all the valuables would obviously drop from the Dreadnought.
You gotta check all that shit, man.
And so we checked the first rec, and the very first rec is like an officer Ratsink blueprint, and we were like, holy crap, check everything.
Let's check your language, guys.
Sorry.
Yeah, but that is really interesting. But you caught on to that right away. And then I think there's a valuable lesson here, and this is something that I would say about EVE Online in general. The best market advice I can give anybody, which is, I'm not the right person to take advice from, but I can give it to you anyway, is when something's new, it's more valuable than later on when it stabilizes. And that goes for ships, and that goes for modules, and that goes for gameplay. All that stuff is more valuable when it comes out because they want people to adopt it.
Yet they nerfed the Dread to the point where no one wants it anymore.
There's no competition yet. You're the only one that has it. And
that too, right. So you'll see large spikes. When there's a secondary effect, right? Something comes out brand new, is very valuable, but what'll happen is over time it'll kind of become less valuable because more competition, and it's been adjusted, usually nerfed, back into a position where it's in balance with everything else. But then as they adjust things, that's another opportunity to say, hey, this thing is coming back in vogue. For instance, hey, they're releasing these plugins that help your shield ability. Therefore, shield ships might actually start selling more, and you'll see them start to go up too. When the announcements are made...
For the record, I didn't... Fonsui, I just want to say that I did not prompt Matterall to bring up shield slaves, but...
Sorry, guys.
I'll just take a step out of this conversation.
Sorry, that's a triggering issue for me.
Oh, what's the trigger? What?
No, it's so tanking is very unbalanced right now in terms of the regen versus boosters versus brick and whatever armor shield. They have a very, very extensive tank rebalance plan with multiple phases, and the linchpin of it is fixing shield regen first, and the core of that is releasing the shield HP implants for slot 1 through 6 that they're going to be naming slave, and this has been worked on without issue, but no technical issues, no balance issues. but dev, hours allocation issues. And
Yeah.
it keeps getting knocked to the bottom of the queue and not happening. And I'm kind of just, I am personally very frustrated because tanking to me is broken because of this. And
At the
they
beginning
have
of the
promised
summer,
us.
yeah, at the beginning of the summer, Fozzie on stage said, in a couple of weeks, this will be on Sissy, and then immediately got deallocated. So that's why when you listen to
Yeah.
Rise's presentations at Vegas, he specifically mentions the Shield Slave problem as why they are now running Talos the way that they are. As you know, they don't want to, they don't promise anything up front. They just kind of tease it and then give us the details like a week ahead of time, because they don't want that thing where they're saying, we do this, and then like get reallocated and then not actually do that, because then it makes everybody mad.
Just for
He
clarity,
included that.
sweet.
He included that in his presentation specifically because I sat down and spoke with him about that particular issue, and I asked like, what? Because we didn't have any answers. We knew that we had been told it was coming, and then we hadn't been told it wasn't. Nothing happened. So I sat down with him and I asked, and I was like, hey, what happened? Like, why did this happen? And he actually explained to me. He's like, yeah, we didn't run into any issues. Everything is fine. We haven't finished the work yet. We want to balance it correctly. We haven't hit any roadblocks on that. But the guys that thought they were going to be able to do this work ended up getting reallocated halfway through.
Just to confirm, Alfonso, are you saying you're saying that tanking is unbalanced, right? Do you think shield tanking is unbalanced right now?
Well, so I'll give the very quick version of this because it's off topic. But essentially, shield regen is very flat. It doesn't really have a low end, a mid range, and a high end in terms of price and effectiveness. And in order to create that, to make it match shield booster tanking, for instance, or armor repper tanking, which are balanced, in order for that to happen, the low end has to get worse, the mid range has to stay the same, and the high end has to be created, which doesn't currently exist. And that is what the shield slaves will do when they add those. It'll create an expensive, high end, high effectiveness option that doesn't exist now. We'll be able to reach performance we haven't been able to reach. And because of the stacking penalties being added, the very, very low end of fill all your mids and lows and rigs with shield regen, that's not going to work anymore. So the low end will be broken, the mid range will stay the same, the high end will be created, and it will be balanced.
Sure, but there's also a shield regen issue that has not been resolved, which I hope that they will resolve before they release them.
Sure,
which
what is that?
Shield regen and tie-dye.
Oh yeah, I mean tie-dye is a whole other thing.
Because
I'm not even getting into that.
Yeah, but like the problem is that if you release the shield slaves now as is, you're going to create a new system of power in the super capital umbrellas and so on, or super groups in general. That means that it doesn't matter what you do as an armor super, you lose to shield supers and tie-dye no matter what.
So if it's as broken as you're describing, obviously that would have to be addressed, because that would mean it would make them invulnerable.
I'm talking about a Komodo being able to tank 1,000,000 DPS. Passive.
Yeah, so if what you're describing is the case, that would have to get fixed, because that's straight up broken. So they would have to fix. No, they would have to fix that in order to release it, and I trust them to do so.
Yeah, neither of us work at CCP, but all I can say is that when we asked the person who does work at CCP, he said that they had no technical hurdles, that they had solved any technical problem that they had. So I assume that would include its interaction with tie-dye, or at least have some sort of mechanical solution.
But the thing is that the shield regen mechanic in tie-dye has not been fixed yet, so it would have to come alongside that then. And
I trust them to do that correctly.
So to go back, to go back to the point in that presentation about where he talked about bringing in shield slaves, he also said that there was an overall tanking overhaul that was happening, including changes to capacitor regeneration modules, and just kind of the way that it sounded like an overall tanking overhaul, including the addition of mutaplasmids into the remaining tanking mods, et cetera, et cetera. So I got the feeling that there was more happening under the hood. But again, like all I can say is that they said that they were working on it and they solved the technical problems already, and now it's just a matter of implementing it. And I have to say that I believe that so far.
Well, anyway, so again, the point that we were making was when something's new, it's valuable. Also, when something gets reshuffled, you will see that it can also become valuable again. These are market trends that you look at if you're an investor type, not necessarily a day trader type. And when they make an announcement, again, like Shield Slaves, which is why we've discussing that for a minute, you will see a spike in all the related fields, the secondary fields that will influence. So plugins will influence Shield, and therefore Shield ships might come back into vogue, and you'll see all the Shield ships spike upon the announcement of plugins for Shield.
This week was everything Minmatar and autocannon related. The Stabber fleet issue went insane.
Yeah, just upon the announcement. By the time you're hearing it, if you're not hearing it right when it happens, by the time you're hearing it, the market is already reacting to it. It reacts instantaneously, and sometimes, many times, overreacts. So you want to watch that spike go up and let it come down, because the hysteria goes away, and you will see it kind of come down and normalize.
That being said,
the best prospecting move.
Oh,
I think you just got run over.
Oh no! The best prospecting move I ever made was when I was watching Amsterdam, and the image of the abyssal icon, the abyssal little tag on a DCU icon came on the screen. It was a black screen with the DCU icon in the center and the abyssal tag on it, nothing else. I didn't wait. I minimized the stream. I went to my market tune, and I bought every single assault damage control, faction assault damage control in all of New Eden that was under like 50 or 60 million ISK. Every single one. I ended up with like 100 of them. They went. My average purchase price was around 40 million a piece. They spiked immediately to 160, and I sold them all and made many billions.
Wow. Quick question. I don't know if it was answered here, so I'll ask it for them. So do shields recharge in real time if you're in tie-dye? I don't know if you answered that, but
that sounds
Yes.
like what the bug is. That's the problem. They are not slowed down with everything else, so they're tanking far too much.
Okay. So
Essentially, if you make a 10% tie-dye, you just multiply your regen by 10, and then that's your passive tank.
Well, that is broken. That's why Komodo can tank as much as it can tank, you were saying.
Yep.
Okay.
We tried it out for the fun of it with the help of a dev, and we couldn't kill the Komodo with 100 Titans doomsdaying simultaneously. We just couldn't.
Everyone who's surprised that tie-dye is screwing something up, raise your hand.
Where did you do that? Did you do that on the test center? You must have.
Yeah, we did it on a private test server.
Oh, I see. Okay. So, and as far as you know, that bug is still in the game?
Yes.
That seems like a pretty big deal. So anyway, thanks guys. It's time to wrap up. Anything else that you guys want to talk about that you're working on? Okay. Ashtarothi, Cable, Fonsway, thanks for helping me out on this second part of the show. And Delacar, thanks very much for helping me out on the first part of the show. Appreciate it. And we had Teddy here, who's a wormhole guy. So a couple of announcements. Let's see if I can do this off the top of my head. Nope, I can't. I'll have to prepare better for the next one. I do want to say, catch Wednesday show. That's our midweek show. It's coming up today. That's with Ron and Silver. And then Sunday, we will begin the year in review. All of December, we'll be reviewing the year and the decade. We should review the decade. Maybe we'll do that on the last show, because this is the end of a decade. So thanks for coming and watching this stream. I also want to say we have created a new corporation. This is not a recruitment pitch. We're not recruiting anyone. It's just to manage the operations. It's called Waypoint Set. That's our corporation. It's going to be running our Fleet Academy that's coming up early next year. We're preparing it all through December, and we'll be active in January, February, and beyond. And that's to train players. Experienced players can also come to classes, because we're going to have experienced FCs teaching seminar classes to be very, very, very specific coursework. You know, like we may have Ashtarothi, for instance, showing you how to run these conduits, or people like legendary FCs like Elise Randolph showing you like what it's like to do a thing that he's very good at, or someone like Pando saying this is what a bomber fleet looks like, although Stukas are probably not as popular as they were. So we're going to have specialized FCs. Yeah, non-existent.
Fun addition, by the way, since I don't think we've actually covered it. The brackets are out for the online qualifier in the EVE World.
The online qualifier. Oh, because there's an online group that gets to qualify to go to FanFest to fight it out for the tournament there?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Where can they find those?
It's not public yet.
Oh, the
but it's out. And you can find it if you search really long. I can link it so you can post it somewhere.
Sure. So the brackets are out. Yeah. So anyway, that Fleet Academy is going to be coming up early next year. Again, we're preparing software to make that possible. And what else we got? Oh, talking in stations. We're going to have all hands meeting coming up soon. That's for internal guys. But if you're a Patreon, I think we're going to let you listen in on our meeting real time. So you can see what we're planning for the next 3 months. We have meetings every 3 months. And we're thinking of making that something that Patreons can get in on, just to include them into our family, because they're a big part of it, right? They're the ones that support us. And I want to thank new Patreons, Dazzling Spod, who's in here with us. And also Katya Sia, thanks very much for sponsoring TIS through Patreon. Really appreciate it. I know it's Christmas, so I'm not doing a pitch until the next year. I think those are the announcements. I want to say thanks, and then we'll see you again tomorrow. Take care, guys.